I want you with the depth chart because, I mean, we know Blake Shapen's the starting quarterback. We don't really need to, get into that. And a lot of other positions we know pretty well what's going on or what was expected is on that piece of paper that everybody received yesterday. But there are a couple of things. So I'm just going to start reading and stop me when you want to talk about something in particular, okay? So Here's the starting depth chart, too deep, I should say, that Baylor football released yesterday, and I have a feeling we're probably going to start right away with some stoppage because wide receivers are listed first, and I'm going by the depth chart that's on Sic'Em365.com. 3 wide receivers listed as first team, and all sophomores. Monterey Baldwin, Hal Presley, and Seth Jones. And then you have others like Javon Gibson and Josh Cameron backing up Seth Jones, Armani Winfield, Jonathan Davidson behind Presley, and Gavin Holmes or Jordan Neighbors behind Monterey Baldwin and Holmes, Winfield, Gibson, Cameron. I think all these guys are people we expect to see a lot of. So take that, starting lineup for what it's worth. But I have to say, Monterey's not the shocker here. And I don't know if shocker is the right word, but hey, Seth Jones, kind of surprising to see his name, and Hal Presley to a lesser extent. But I have a feeling that Seth Jones, who you've talked about recently, was one of those that made you go, okay, when you first saw this depth chart.
Yeah, and, we talked about him probably 2 weeks ago, right? I kind of brought his name up as a guy who had really been rising, and he was a guy that I think everyone just decided to forget about after the spring game. He went out, he was the starter in the spring game. People forget that. He came out in the fall, played really, really well. Him and Josh Cameron have been battling throughout camp for that spot. And overall, Seth won the job. It's not surprising for me because of how well Seth played in the fall and how well he did in the scrimmages as well. But it is a little surprising because Josh played really well also. And so it's just very tough to pick between the two. Seth is going to get the start. Fine with that. I think Hal and Monterey were kind of the locked-in ones that I felt like I was starting to trend towards knowing they were going to be the starters at their position, especially Monterey. We knew that from the beginning of spring camp, but I think Hal coming back from injury, there was a little bit of question marks there, but he's really turned into a go-to guy for them. So it was all about that last position. And those two guys are going to get to play a lot, both Seth Jones and Josh Cameron. So don't read this as only these 3 guys are going to play all year, kind of like it was a year ago. That's not going to happen. You're going to see Javon Gibson. You're going to see Josh Cameron. You're going to see Armani Winfield, and you'll probably get to see Gavin Holmes as well. Those are the guys that I expect to contribute in a big way this year. But I think the other notable part about this depth chart is no Jalen Ellis. And Jonathan Davidson is a walk-on. So is Josh Cameron, but Jonathan Davidson Josh isn't anymore, I don't believe. But Jonathan Davidson, he's a walk-on. He's in there over Jalen Ellis, which is very, very intriguing in my eyes. I know Jalen dealt with injuries all throughout the spring, but by everything I saw, he was healthy in the fall and just has not found a way to, I guess, put it all together. I'm very curious if he comes out and shows some flashes in the Albany game, if he can work his way back into the mix. But right now, he seems to be on the outside looking in.
All right, elsewhere, looking at the offensive line, pretty much as expected, going left to right. Connor Galvin, Micah Mazuka at left guard, Jacob Gall at center, Grant Miller right guard, Gavin Byers right tackle, and then you got your various backups, Timothy Dawn at center, Mose Jeffrey behind Micah Mazuka at left guard. I'm guessing that's where you'd probably like to start as far as that group of players goes.
Let's just start with the fact that Mascua won the job over Mose.
Mazuka.
Yeah. Oh, Mazuka. Yeah, he won the job over Mose. And I think, that was one where Mose came on really, really strong during the spring. And in my eyes, he would have been the starter after spring ball. But I think talent finally won out. And this is another thing we've talked about for a while. I think Micah gives them the highest ceiling at the position, but Mose is very, very good. And I just want to make sure people keep an eye on Mose. He's going to be a very important depth piece for this offensive line throughout the entire season. I'm very happy to see Micah win the job, but I'm also very equally as happy to see the improvement Mose has made from last year to this year. Both are going to be very important for this offensive line going forward, and congrats to Micah on winning that job. I think that's a big one for this offense to reach their ceiling this year.
Tight end Ben Sims backed up by Drake Dabney, and they can go like 5 or 6 deep. It's scary. Their tight end room, we're going to see a ton of the tight ends this year. Running back Tay McWilliams, and then behind him you've got a bunch of oars. There's a bunch of oars on this depth chart. And again, this is just a very loose thing, which is why we're not going to spend a ton of time on it. But you got Quaylon Jones, who's kind of emerged, and maybe that's some injuries, maybe that's some just he's emerged, and either way that's good because he's not a name we've heard a lot about. Richard Reese, the freshman, and then Josh Fleeks, the senior, as well, but about as expected there.
Yeah, and those two guys, Quaylon and Richard Reese, they performed extremely well. Squirrel missed some time in the fall, and those two guys rose to the occasion. And it's definitely been more about what they've done than the fact that Squirrel hasn't been there. They have performed really well. They're going to have a role in this team going forward, and Tay being the starter makes all the sense in the world. And Squirrel is not on the depth chart because I think the kind of guess is he probably won't play, and that might be the reason why.
Yeah, Aranda was asked about him and Al Walcott. You know, a couple weeks back when I was at practice, I had posted simply on the premium forums. I didn't go to Twitter and blast that they were hurt or anything. I just only on the premium forums, but of course it just kind of spreads and other people saw him, and so he got asked about it a couple times, and he's just diverted it. Like, he does not answer injury questions ever, really, you know, unless he kind of just has no other choice, and so he said a lot without saying absolutely anything about Al Walcott or Craig Williams yesterday during his press conference. Like, he mentioned them as like leaders and stuff, but he didn't say anything about their status. So we'll see on Saturday, but I would be kind of surprised if we saw Squirrel against Albany. And Al Walcott, he had a wrap on his hand. I mean, that could have already be off by now for all we know. So that's not, like I said, it's not why I was blasting it out there for like, oh my gosh, these guys are hurt. You know, they're hopefully going to be back sooner rather than later.
And to me, it matters a lot less for Squirrel than Al, because we know what Squirrel can do at running back.
Right.
We know this. I'm not worried about when he's healthy. He's great. I think we all know that. Al, on the other hand, you know, he's working in a new position, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but I think it's kind of important for him to get some reps. He's missed a lot of fall camp, and I don't know what to expect from him. I think he's going to be great, but we haven't seen it on the field. And for him to just get thrown in against BYU, that would kind of be a tough adjustment, I would think.
Quarterback, you got Blake Shapen. So there's your offense. So really, I mean, I guess you could say Seth Jones, a wide receiver, Micah Mazuka as a starter on the O-line, even though, you know, you've talked plenty about him, are kind of, I guess, those are noticeable and things that were, you know, not necessarily predicted beforehand. But there's your offense as a whole. Defensively, I mean, you know what's up front. Bunch of big, nasty dudes. Maxwell, Ika, Gabe Hall. You've got them as your starting, you know, three-man front. And then just a bunch of oars, you know, Jackson Player, TJ Franklin, Cooper Lands. I mean, a ton of different guys. Linebacking core at your jack spot, you got an oar with Garmin Randolph and the super senior type in Bryson Jackson. Who also single digit, which we'll get to in just a moment. You got Matt Jones, who I'm excited to see this year. Mike, of course, the stable, tried and true there in the middle man, and Dylan Doyle. And, I guess there's your three linebacker spots right there.
Yeah, I was going to say let's stop there because we're going to have to talk a little bit more when we get a little bit lower down on the depth chart. But I think the interesting ones, Cooper Lands on second team getting an oar with TJ Franklin. That's intriguing to me. I think Lance is going to play some this year, but I wasn't sure if he would even be listed on the depth chart, to be honest with you. I thought he'd be more like third team and just get some reps against, you know, maybe the weaker teams on the schedule. But this tells me that they might actually have a role for him. I don't think he's going to be playing over TJ Franklin or really eating into too many of his snaps, but maybe on passing downs, they feel like Cooper could make an impact as a pass rusher. Outside of that, everything else is pretty much what I expected on the defensive line. Moving on to Jack, Garmin Randolph, Bryson Jackson, they've been the starters there for a long time. Bryson is also going to get snaps at the will position as a blitzer, kind of like what we saw against Ole Miss this past year. Elite quality, his ability to get after the quarterback. So that's kind of why he's listed at both there. As far as the backups at Jackie Marshall, Tony Nyanwu, very interested to see how they do as well. And then also Josh White. He's listed at Mike linebacker instead of Will. He was doing a lot of the Will work during fall camp, but now maybe he's made the full move to Mike, and he's the primary backup to Dylan Doyle. Fascinated to see how that all works out as well and how many reps he actually gets this year.
All right, in the secondary, Al Walcott at star. You got Christian Morgan at safety along with Devin Lemire, and then Mark Milton and Lorando Johnson as your starting corners. So definitely seeing the use side of whoever is going to play opposite of Mark Milton at corner. And then, Christian Morgan, who hadn't really been talked about a bunch, has kind of been more of a backup type the way that they've talked about it, but listed as star. Maybe that's a courtesy for the seniors. Hey, it's the first game of the senior year, super senior year, whatever. Give them the nod there. But either way, there's your secondary, and that rounds out the defense.
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts here. Let me start with cornerback because it's a little bit easier. This is who I expected to be the starters at cornerback when the season started. Once Lorando made the move from star to cornerback, it was pretty apparent that he was likely going to start there. And Mark Milton was kind of locked in as the veteran at the position. I like the backups there. Chateau Reed, Tevin Williams, A.J. McCarty, Reggie Bush. Great group of backups and very talented. I think you're going to see all of them play against Albany, and I think you might see all of them play throughout the year. And I'm actually, Reggie Bush has been fantastic throughout fall camp. There's a chance that he does not redshirt if he is truly as impactful as he has been throughout the fall. Safety, though. This is really interesting. So I think Devin Neal has been playing some star, so it makes sense that he's listed at the star. I also think this might be indicative to a possibility that Al Walcott does not play against Albany, which would therefore mean that Devin Neal would start at the star position instead of starting somewhere else. That would make some sense to me. I think when the season gets rolling, I'd be very curious if he doesn't take over the boundary safety position, which is where Christian Morgan currently is listed. It just seems that way. But in general, it looks like Devin Neal and Christian Morgan are kind of going to be floating around and playing a lot of snaps, but also floating. Al Walcott locked in at the star. And then the only guy that's really entrenched as a starter at safety is really Devin Lemire. He's literally been the starter at field safety since the beginning of spring camp, and he's been that way ever since. He's been very, very good throughout fall camp, a guy who's been a big riser, and they've needed that because they need someone to replace JT Woods. Now, I will mention, it's not going to be a one-for-one thing. He does not have the speed, especially the deep speed that JT Woods has, but in two high safety looks, he is very, very good, and he's got the one thing that JT Woods also had. He has a knack for forcing turnovers, so keep an eye on Devin Lemire as the season progresses.
All right, rounding out this depth chart here, looking at special teams, not a lot to discuss, I don't believe, and I just had it. Field goals, you got Isaiah Hankins, Noah Rauschenberg on kickoffs, Isaac Power at punter, and then kick returns, you've got Monterey Baldwin and Richard Reese listed as both your kick returners and your punt returners. So that's who you can expect to see. And interesting how that might change just because of Monterey and Richard Reese. Those aren't very big dudes that are back there. And then Richard Reese, you wonder how much burn he's getting at running back and kind of who else goes in there. But I don't think anything too shocking as far as special teams go. So there's your Baylor depth chart.